All right, friends, the full moon in Sagittarius is in around 12 hours' time, and all the normal full moon things apply. An escalation in agitation, an escalation in emotional or intuitive noise, trouble sleeping, tears, tantrums, intensity, but also on the positive side, exposure. Um, Particularly kind of spotlight, limelight exposure that is temporary, depending on where it is that the sun and the moon are in your chart. You may find that you are more present publicly temporarily. Again, public is a strange word to use in this context, but you know, just visibility. Let's put it that way. Temporary visibility of some sort that has a kind of a spotlight or reflected spotlight quality. Culminations, offers, completions, moving on, moving forward, but you know, it's all about that polarity when you've got the sun in Gemini and you've got the moon in Sagittarius. You've got this sense of the Gemini part of the chart um, being spotlit, subconsciously at least, but for this brief period of time around this full moon, an emphasis on the opposing principle. Again, to me, it's less about. To me, it's less about the signs than it is the houses, because as you know, opposing houses are very much in conversation with each other, and it's a little bit like light and dark or night and day. One can't really exist without the other, right? It's the absence of one thing that makes the other thing, makes its opposing principle possible. Um, and so, temporarily with a full moon, while you are dealing with a 30 odd day sun's subconscious spotlighting a particular part of the chart where Gemini sits in your chart, there is an escalation or an energetic focus at the time of a full moon in the opposing principle or the opposing part of the chart. So I'm going to let you determine what that means for those of you who know your chart, know where Gemini sits, and know where Sagittarius sits, which houses they occupy, and what those houses stand for. There are three things about this full moon I want to emphasize. The first thing is that the full moon, as far as I am concerned, and different astrologers will have different viewpoints on this. As far as I am concerned, this full moon is unaspected. All the aspects that this moon is said to be making, either it makes on its way to becoming full, or it's not quite. Typically, I'm looking for, with a full moon, I'm looking for, even with a full moon, I am looking for aspects that are made on the moon's way to becoming full. But I'm typically looking within a 5-degree orb. And I'm not, and I'm going to just kind of leave it there. Again, different people have, and again, if you are not an astrology person and what I just said doesn't make sense to you, ignore. But for those who does, that's just where I sit. And I'm going to, again, just leave it at that. I think, anyway. But the full moon encodes two important transits that are part of an ongoing story. The first one is that when Mercury was preparing to go retrograde, when Mercury entered Taurus and on April the 3rd, and it was proceeding through Taurus, it was moving towards a conjunction to Uranus. But before that Uranus conjunction could be complete, it went retrograde on April the 21st. It went direct on, I'm just looking at these dates here, it went direct on, May the 14th, and it cleared its shadow period, shadow area, its shadow degrees on May the 30th. So whatever it was that we may have been actively processing, it entered its shadow area around April the 7th, around May the 31st, it left its shadow degrees. And we are now on June the 3rd. So somewhere, whatever it was that had to be processed multiple times and thought through, I've done other videos on this, lessons that needed to be learned, things that were in our blind spot that needed to be brought to our awareness in a Mercury retrograde way. And again, I don't want this to turn into a Mercury retrograde window, so I'm going to refer you to my last couple of videos where there's greater emphasis on this. The bottom line is that Mercury tomorrow, the day after the full moon, finally gets to conjunct Uranus. So Mercury going through Taurus, getting close to conjuncting Uranus in Taurus, goes retrograde, goes direct. Something about, something about, I would say something that perhaps went back to March the 30th, even, when Venus conjuncted Uranus in Taurus and Mars trine Saturn. Um, Mars from Cancer trine Saturn in Pisces, and that too is part of this ongoing story. Something about something about even going back to March the 30th, and then moving forward from there, definitely April the 7th to the 21st, and then retrograde, and then forward on May the 15th, and finally clearing those degrees on May the 31st, needing to process events, particularly during April into May, um, and kind of reaching some sort of completion or conclusion around it. Now, things don't just start or come from nowhere, and they don't just end and just kind of disappear. They linger and they start from a continuum, but I'll leave that alone. But the important thing is that tomorrow Mercury does conjunct Uranus, and there's a lot of emphasis in the sign of Taurus, and I'm encouraging you, insofar as there are priorities to be looked at, to really pay attention to where the sign of Taurus sits in your chart. On June the 1st, we had Jupiter and the North Node conjunct there. A really magical transit, but not magic, as much denoting completions and endings of cycles, as much as there's a need to pour ourselves into the Taurus part of our chart and to give it a lot of attention and love and nurture and truth and authenticity and grounded um, progress. With the North Node, you really have to be a little careful, because the North Node, our sense of purpose and a sense of calling can become so possessing that we have to really find within ourselves our connection to the 3D reality of paying bills and managing our day-to-day lives and determining what our comfort is around chucking it all and moving towards the North Node and the sense of calling and the magic that creates, but at the same time acknowledging that taking care of our comforts is also part of the equation. So groundedly moving forward towards a sense of calling and developing skills and strengths and underdeveloped muscles, and pouring our attention to the Taurus part of the chart. Also because the current Mercury cycle is in the Taurus part of our chart until July the 1st. There's a need to take communication related action, transactional action in the Taurus part of our chart as well. And you've got the Mercury Uranus conjunction. Uranus, a longer term transit through Taurus, encouraging greater authenticity and individuality in the Taurus part of our chart. Almost Uranus has a tendency to create this kind of outsider mentality, this kind of do it your own way, your individual path, your individual, nothing cookie cutter about it, but really your authentic path. And with Mercury conjuncting Uranus a few days after Jupiter conjuncts the North Node, there are still questions here about what is my right path, what is the right direction to go in, but there are inklings and there are opportunities. And so, communications and opportunities could come up through mercurial means, the internet, websites, texts, communication that may need to be explored and that may need action. Indeed, even in April and May, with the eclipses in the offing and the fact that with the Aries solar eclipse, we have a corresponding Taurus lunar eclipse in October, we're being pulled towards paying attention to releasing what needs to be released in the Scorpio part of our chart and move towards the Taurus and Aries part of our chart, particularly the Taurus part of our chart. And so there could be, when transits occur, there's a lot of prediction on the day of the transit, this will happen and that. And with Mercury conjunct Uranus, there's a lot of lightning will strike in terms of communication, and surprising news will come, and because it's Uranus. And I find that things churn and move more gradually. What is more striking is what has happened during the question to really ponder is what has happened during April and May that encourages the release in the Scorpio part of your chart and the leaning into the Taurus part of your chart. And communication, communicating with others, communication related resources will not surprise me at all that while processing has needed to be occurred and lessons have needed to be learned and incorporated and things that were in our blind spot and projects that have a resonance and a connection to Mercury being retrograde, and for Mercury retrograde people, decision making all of a sudden becoming much more clearer, and all that is part of the equation. But when we contemplate this Mercury or Uranus conjunction on the heels of Mercury finally clearing its shadow period and a Jupiter North Node conjunction, I would encourage you to look at April and May and really see what has been brewing and churning that is pulling you forward into the Taurus part of the chart and releasing what needs to be released in the Scorpio part of the chart, and the conversation that is occurring between the Aries and the Taurus parts of your chart, because we have this handoff of North Node eclipses that is occurring in 2023. Okay, if you do not know your chart or astrology, I would just pay attention to when we talk about the planets that we're talking about, what communication, what processing. There's a mundane set of processing that has occurred around events that have been surrounding you and developing since March the 30th, that date, into April and May, and lessons and things bubbling up and things becoming clearer. And then there's the larger question of you being led forward in a fated way and ensuring that you're giving enough attention to the breadcrumbs and the information and the progress that spirit makes as it encourages change, and not ignoring things. Leave no stone unturned. Give every opportunity that comes up your best, and then use that as a mechanism to see where is it that something develops and does not develop, particularly if it applies to the Taurus part of your chart and Aries part of your chart. But it would not surprise me at all if during April and May there's been a sense of what is it is that needs to be released and has been being released in the Scorpio part of the chart since September, October of last year, and how to lean into and continue to develop and kind of give a kind of final culmination in the Taurus part of your chart and create the beginning there, and to, it's like that's where you need to pour a lot of your energy in order to see fruition, especially from a communication perspective. But I would, it's not as if opportunities will not occur and may not come your way as you head towards tomorrow, related to the Taurus part of your chart and through communication. There's a larger question here about progress and direction. And, with Jupiter and Mercury and the North Node and Uranus, it's a little bit like that principle of knocking on doors, and 9 of them will not open. But what is that 10th door where things happen and information is given to you and keeps pulling you forward? And with Uranus, again, people will often say lightning will strike. It's much more gradual than that, but it's also much more individual and liberating. It's, you know, Jupiter, North Node, Uranus, these are magical planets, really, and often positive planets, even though they can be associated, especially in Jupiter's case, with endings. But at the end of the day, it's moving you forward towards something. So as Mercury finishes up its conjunction with Uranus and is also finishing up its kind of sojourn through Taurus and is getting ready to enter Gemini in about a week's time. So use this time to think about and to refocus your to-do list if you need to, and prioritize in a higher way or in a more important way as you make your way through June the Taurus part of your chart. And again, for those of you who don't know and don't know your chart, just I would say pay active attention to what is that through line, what is that thread that feels undeniably like forward movement that has been pulling you through, pulling you forward in April, but this is especially true in May. What is that thing that is pointing you towards your future, where obstacles are clearing and information is coming in, and even if it is not here yet, uh, what is it that is drawing you forward in the middle of everything you're managing? The second transit is very much around this communication between the planets that have been transiting the sign of Cancer, Mars and Venus, and how they're opposing Pluto as it goes from Aquarius to Capricorn, and Jupiter and the North Node in Taurus and the South Node in Scorpio. This grand cross. We had this Mars opposing Pluto, squaring Jupiter and the nodes, grand cross at the time of the um, Taurus new moon, and now we have Venus. Uh, this is why I said that the March the 30th date, with Mars being the first planet also to trine Saturn. So the planets in Cancer have been trining, which is a supportive aspect, Saturn and Neptune and Pisces, and then squaring and forming this grand cross of a square between this very forward looking energy and dynamic with Jupiter and the North Node in Taurus and opposing Pluto. So Jupiter and the North Node squaring Mars, Venus in Cancer / Leo, because these squares are happening at the last degrees, and Pluto in Capricorn, and then Mars and Venus opposing Pluto in Capricorn and Aquarius as all these planets make their transitions into signs. So in this case, Venus plays a really important and interesting role here, because the planet that is making this, getting ready to make this grand cross by both squaring Jupiter and the North Node in the coming days, um, and and opposing Pluto. So Venus opposes Pluto on June the 5th and squares the nodes on June the 7th, June the 8th. It already, I think, and it squares Jupiter on June the 11th. Um, Goodness. So the squares are developing. The other thing is that this particular full moon, you know, is ruled by Jupiter because it's a Sagittarius full moon. Jupiter's in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus is in Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the moon. So somewhere between the moon, Jupiter, and Venus, those are the three planets that are dispositing this chart. Um, and again, you might be able to. There's something about this forward energy and movement that has been created by the eclipses and Jupiter and Uranus, and an awareness of those forces, or those, it could be people, it could be situations, it could be circumstances that are standing in our way and creating delays. With Venus in the mix here, the key is in, it's a softer energy than with Mars, of course. And so the key may lie in, and Venus is the planet that over the next week makes the most active transits with these squares and oppositions that are occurring. It may be that it may be time to sit back a little bit. I know it's a full moon occurring, but you may find that peace offerings and bridge building and emphasis on harmony, relationships, receptivity, a certain amount of passivity, observing, letting go and letting things take their course, letting things be, letting things reach their fruition, opportunities coming in. You know, act. I think my biggest concern is to not recognize the opportunities at this point in time, and that would be something to just, and that would be one thing to really pay attention to. And if they have something to do with the Sagittarius or the Taurus part of your chart, and you're somehow dismissing them, or somehow not quite feeling the energy around them, or not quite seeing how to go about, I would encourage you then to move towards, with Mars and soon Venus in Leo and the full moon in Sagittarius and Chiron in Aries, there is a certain amount of trining also that is occurring, that is encouraging action. So don't 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 dismiss opportunities at this time, but also when it comes to those things that feel like there's an awareness of whatever it is that is blocking progress. It may be that a more harmonious approach, a gentler approach, an exploration of relationships and moving things to a more functional and a harmonious and balanced and handshake um, way, uh, bridge building, um, diplomacy in a genuine and a positively intended way, in a compassionate way, in a caring and an understanding way. It may be that as action is taken towards the pursuit of opportunities, the way to deal with a lot of buildup of challenge or negative or energy may well be the masculine energy and approach may be in the pursuit of goals and opportunities, and that is fine and should be done. The more feminine relationship and harmony approach may be the key to um, ensuring that you're able to move forward, particularly when it comes to dealing with forces that feel like, or situations or circumstances that feel like they could stand in the way of that forward movement. Okay, when it's the fastest moving planet when it comes to squares and grand crosses that hold the key for how to solve something and how to keep something moving. And so all eyes are on Venus right now for the next week, as Venus makes her transit from Cancer to Leo, and joins Mars there. So don't let Venusian passivity not kind of get you off course when it comes to executing on things that can help with that forward movement in the Taurus and Sagittarius part of the chart and the Aries part of the chart. And at the same time, when it comes to handling or dealing with obstacles, use a slightly more passive and relationship and harmonious approach, a more archetypally feminine, a more receiving, a more letting go and letting God, a more watchful, a less assertive and less aggressive stance, and bridge builds and create and engender harmony to continue to help move things forward in a more harmonious way, particularly when it comes to energies or forces that feel like they could be obstacles in the way of that forward movement or process right now. That's where I'm going to leave it. I hope you found this useful. It's a full moon, it's not an eclipse, and you'll feel it that way. It'll be done, but always worth thinking about, what has been escalating over the past 48 hours and continues to for about 24 hours after a full moon. Leave it at that. Like, comment, subscribe, click on the bell icon and the wiggly bell icon on top of the bell icon to be notified when I do new videos, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.